Buenos Aires. Guten Tag. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Smokepit Fairytales V, Morn, the Liquid Dew of Youth. I had a lot of fun when I was originally writing this novel back in 2018, I think? No, it was 2018. Because I wrote Smokepit Fairytales 4, 5, and 6 while I was the platoon sergeant at the base combat camera unit in 29 Palms. If you didn't figure that out in the last book, at least the first draft. But anyway, I also had a lot of fun editing this one. I think it came together great. Anyway, let's get this book out to you. We're going to keep back doing the thing. We're going to get back on schedule. One chapter every week on Wednesday. And if you're a YouTube channel member, you get these as soon as I upload them. If you are on Patreon, you get them as soon as I get done with them. This whole book, by the way, is already on Audible if you don't want to wait for me to, read it to you here. But without further ado, More in the Liquid Dew of Youth, Smokepit Fairytales 5, Chapter 1. Let's roll into it.
More in the Liquid Dew of Youth, Smokepit Fairytales, Part 5. Chapter 1. Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. Thatch gazed at the Annapolis skyline. Wind blew the gray clouds, blanketing the sky over the mountains in the distance. He was putting off paperwork. He hated it with a passion. He only had a few lines left on his report before he sent it up, but after staring at a computer all day, he needed a few minutes of respite. After Volgograd, Okan and he were given combat meritorious promotions to lieutenant and transferred to headquarters Marine Corps. Okan treated it as a blessing. Thatch thought it was a curse. Almost all he did anymore was type. He missed the fleet, but he was able to pull some strings to get what friends he could sent with him. Okan's office stood next to his. They looked over different areas of the security section. Thatch thought that it was too low of a billet for a lieutenant. He was a glorified babysitter who spent all day typing security reports. The pay was nice, though. He managed to get Chuck, now a staff sergeant, in as his platoon sergeant. Capulet had moved up and ran the troops in the security section as working management, even though he'd also made his way to staff sergeant. Stockton, now a chief petty officer, ran the medical detachment. Vickers was there as general population, but she spent most of her time down at a bar on Front Street named King and Tun, buying drinks from McKenzie, who got out and set himself up as a bartender. A few others had made their way up and over to headquarters too. Both Gemery and Ramsey had gotten transfers. Thatch thought it ironic that they both considered themselves a higher tier for getting orders to the capital, even though the work was less strenuous and there was nothing that should have really been considered vigorous or demanding. Thatch finished his report, locked his computer, changed out of his red digital camouflage uniform into his bomber jacket, his dad's old scarf and jeans, then walked down to his old blue Mako sloop in the parking garage. The streets of Annapolis were littered with snowflakes and red sand. The plow trucks were still on the southern side of the city, working their way up. Thatch's Mako skidded on small ice patches here and there, but Thatch had been driving on Martian roads since he was a kid, and nothing was unmanageable. He parked behind the King and Tun, sat at the far end bar stool. The building was only a little older than a decade, and just then starting to get broken in. Thatch scratched at a hairline crack in the bar's dark, faux wood top with his fingernail while he waited for McKenzie to finish talking to a customer on the far end. McKenzie noticed Thatch and asked,
"Are you doing beer or liquor today?"
Beer's fine.
McKenzie brought him a frosted mug of bubble amber liquid.
Thanks.
Thatch took a swig.
Yep. You getting food?
Thatch tongued his right fang.
Yeah. I'll just have a dozen wings.
We're out of teriyaki. Is Louisiana all right?
Sure.
As McKenzie disappeared into the back, Chuck and Stockton pushed through the front door. Thatch waved and Chuck sat on the stool next to him.
What's going on, buddy?
Same shit, different day.
Stockton led herself behind the bar, poured herself a beer and mixed Chuck a rum and coke, leaving out 2 shots of whiskey in front of her stool. She walked back around and nodded at McKenzie when he returned from the back. Stockton handed McKenzie one of the shot glasses.
It's been a year to the day.
Holy shit, it has.
Chuck said. McKenzie twisted his face in near disbelief.
Yeah, you're right.
The 4 of them raised and tapped their glasses.
Volgograd!
Stockton bumped her glass, downed it, then poured the final shot on the ground. They looked back and forth between each other silently for a few moments before Thatch asked.
Well, what now?
Chuck smiled.
We drink and drink and drink and drink, and then we drink some more.
Thatch nodded and downed his beer.
I can't believe you made it all the way to first lieutenant in a year.
Stockton smirked at Thatch.
Well, you made it to chief.
Yeah, those dumb fucks have no idea what they've done.
And they made you the substance abuse officer.
Right? How stupid were they?
The 4 of them drank into the evening. McKenzie was the only one who didn't completely ignore the other patrons. He dipped out from the group every few minutes to make sure other people at the bar were tended to. The front door slid open and cold air filled the tavern. When Thatch felt the draft, he turned to see Glaedwine and Piroska walk in from the dirty, snow-covered sidewalks. Thatch slapped Chuck and Stockton on the shoulder, and the 3 of them stood at attention for the Commandant and the Sergeant Major.
Raddies!
General Piroska smiled as he headed to the bar. Stockton and Chuck sat down. Thatch stayed up and hugged Glaedwine when she reached him.
Hey, Ma, how's it going?
Ooh, cold.
Glaedwine shook the frost off her clothes. She took off her trench coat and laid it over one of the stools. She scoffed at the snow that had made its way through her outer layer onto her black turtleneck.
How about you, honey?
I'm doing good.
Thatch smiled and sat back down.
Headquarters life treating you well?
Glaedwine looked at McKenzie and signaled for a drink.
I fucking hate it.
Thatch admitted.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Piroska butted in.
Staff duties are never fun. You'll make your way back to the fleet at some point.
Thanks, sir.
Thatch nodded at the Commandant.
I'm sorry I missed your promotion ceremony. I had some other business to attend to. I did, however, sign the warrant myself.
Thatch had a sneaking suspicion that he had only gotten promoted to first lieutenant because his ma was a sergeant major of the Marine Corps and she had the Commandant's ear. But he didn't complain like he might have in the past. Thatch waved him off.
Don't worry about it, sir. It's more than enough to know you're thinking about me.
He lied. Thatch didn't care about Piroska's opinion in any way, shape, or form and missed being a sergeant. He viewed the commission as a curse more than a blessing.
I remember being a lieutenant on staff duty.
Piroska looked at McKenzie when he returned to the bar.
Can I get a glass of white wine?
You would drink that shit.
McKenzie thought to himself.
Yes, sir. I'll have it right out.
I was running around Russia with a rifle platoon until I was wounded and sent home.
Piroska stared at the TV silently, glowing on the far end of the bar.
I didn't want to come home, and I wished I hadn't. Then, I was evacuated to the moon when the Russians launched their nukes. Should have been more careful for what I wished for.
Thatch, Stockton, and Chuck weren't interested in what Piroska was saying. They were there to commemorate the Battle of Volgograd. The Commandant wasn't there, and they felt like he was intruding on their night. They couldn't, however, send him away. Glaedwine took a sip of her drink.
What's messed up most about this whole thing is that no one stuck first. They were performing a light-speed experiment, the Hadron Collider. Things went south and it exploded. It took out half of Switzerland, and everybody else thought it was a bomb and started slinging nukes.
She drank another gulp and grimaced at her glass.
Hindsight's 20/20, right?
Thatch looked at the disdain painted on Glaedwine's face. He didn't know how to express his sorrow for her, so he lifted an arm up and gave her another light hug. Glaedwine patted Thatch on the back.
Thanks, honey.
She looked at her watch, then at Thatch, Stockton, and Chuck.
Is this the plan for tonight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, well, I just came in for a drink and tell you how proud I am of you.
Glaedwine put the empty glass back down and grabbed her coat.
I'll see you tomorrow.
With that, she left the King and Tun. Piroska kept his eyes on the TV as he stood behind Stockton and Chuck. Stockton stared at Thatch and Chuck's eyes until she got their attention. When they were focused on her, she shot her eyes at Piroska, then raised her eyebrows as if to ask,
What the hell is he doing here?
Thatch and Chuck shrugged, answering that they hadn't a clue with their body language. Chuck looked up at Piroska from under his brow, then to the TV, which was being so adamantly watched. The news was on, but the anchor wasn't talking about anything important. He turned back to Stockton and Thatch, smiling to show his golden fang, mocking the Commandant's presence.
So, where's Capulet and Okan?
Okan had something she needed to do with her kids for their school, and Capulet is out with his wife.
Huh. Capulet hasn't shot her yet and buried her in the desert?
Nah, I don't think he's going to. Where's Vickers at? She's usually down at the bar anyway, right?
I think she's on a date. She'll probably drag whoever it is down here at some point tonight.
Thatch finished his beer.
Okay, well, one more, then I think I'm gonna head out.
They all had one more shot in remembrance of Volgograd and went their separate ways for the night. Thatch pulled the sloop up in front of his townhouse and leaned on the fender. He zipped up his coat, tightened his scarf, and pulled out a cigarette. The wind wasn't more than a breeze, and the air was crisp. Thatch was trying to cut back on the cigarettes, but didn't want to quit entirely. He had dedicated to not smoking in his house or car in an effort to inconvenience himself to the point where smoking became a chore. He flicked open his lighter and brought the cigarette to the flame. He took in the first drag and exhaled a thick plume of smoke that mixed with the warm air from his lungs, leaving a small cloud around him that was visible only in the light shining from the single lamppost in the front lawn.
Thatch?
Someone called from behind. The voice was familiar, but Thatch couldn't put a finger on who it was. He turned to see Samum standing in a black peacoat. Thatch's body seized and stiffened when he recognized her. She'd cut her hair short. He hadn't laid eyes on her since she knocked on his door before he left for Volgograd. He hadn't planned to ever see or hear from her again. His mind raced, trying to put the puzzle together that would tell him why she was standing in front of his house. His heart punched through his chest, reminding him that his feelings for her were just as strong as they used to be. They'd only been hidden from himself, not diminished in any way, shape, or form.
What are you doing here?
I just moved in. I got orders to headquarters, and I went to get a bottle of wine to celebrate moving in all my stuff.
She looked Thatch over as he stood by his car.
What are you doing here?
I live here.
Thatch pointed to the mailbox that read, Allensworth.
I've been at headquarters for a while now.
Huh. Small world.
Small Marine Corps.
Tell me about it.
No, seriously.
Thatch flicked the ash from his half-burnt cigarette.
It seems like half of Camp Castle's moving up here.
Like who?
Half my old platoon's here, but that's because I pulled some strings and got them orders. Then Gimri and Ramsey are here. I don't know how those two idiots managed to get to Annapolis.
Samum rolled her eyes.
Those gap-toothed idiots probably lost their virginities to their cousins when they were 12. I'm actually kind of curious how they managed to keep enough brain function open to breathe unassisted.
Thatch licked his right fang under his lip and smirked. He hadn't forgotten anything that had happened between the two of them, or what he saw Samum do with Ramsey or Gemery. He decided not to bring anything up. He didn't need to start a petty fight with the neighbor over what he was trying to convince himself was petty bullshit that no longer mattered.
Yeah.
Thatch nodded. He took one long drag from his smoke, then crushed it under his boot.
It was, nice seeing you, Samum. I'm going in.
Samum smiled and nodded.
Yeah, you too.
Thatch made his way to the kitchen, dropping off his shoes and his jacket en route. All of a sudden, seeing Samum put a bad taste in his mouth and filled his soul with anxiety. The closest thing he could relate the taste to was copper. Thatch pulled out a bottle of whiskey and poured himself a drink, hoping the high alcohol content would numb the insides of his face. The thought of her moving in next door twisted his stomach. He downed the firewater and sat himself down on one of the tall chairs sitting by the kitchen's bar. Not 5 minutes later, his doorbell rang. Thatch knew it was her, but he couldn't stop himself from walking across the small townhouse and opening the door. Samum stood at the threshold with a bottle of wine in her hand, wearing a smile and her coat.
Mind if I come in? I need to borrow your corkscrew.
Thatch's mind screamed.
No, bitch, go the fuck away.
But his mouth smiled and invited her in. Samum walked into the living room and took in her surroundings. She slipped off her coat and laid it on the couch.
I like your pictures.
She pointed to a couple of pieces Thatch had painted and framed.
Thanks.
He smiled, wondering if Samum could see the ants crawling in and out of his skin, or if it was just his imagination.
You did these?
Yeah, I really like the way the color ended up turning out on this one.
He pointed to the painting of a knot-ridden tree growing out of an unkempt chimney.
What's it mean?
Nothing, I just thought it'd look cool.
Samum scanned the rest of the downstairs.
Can I use your bottle opener?
Yeah.
Thatch smiled and led her to the kitchen. He was trying to hide what was going on inside his mind, hoping that it wouldn't manifest itself. He couldn't figure out why he was allowing himself to entertain her. He dug through one of his junk drawers and pulled out the twisted little tool. He had to fight his limbs to handle the corkscrew through an almost overwhelming feeling of fear. And he had to go to war with his face, not to show it. He wondered why he felt the way he did. Was it a spell she'd cast on him? He poured himself another glass of whiskey and sat back down in his chair. Samum opened her wine bottle.
So, how have things been?
She asked like there wasn't any bad blood in the water between them.
They've been good.
Thatch slowly lied.
I'm really digging being back in New Philly.
You're from here, right?
Yeah, that's what's good about working in Annapolis. I'm right down the road from home.
They seem to pretty much be the same city.
Samum invited herself to dig through Thatch's cabinets for a glass and poured herself a drink. She turned around and rested her butt on his counter.
I like your haircut.
He said, trying to sound confident. He didn't want Samum to pick up on his nervousness. It was a blatant lie. The cut wasn't terrible, but her old hair was as long as the day and as beautiful as the sun's rays.
Thanks.
She flicked back her locks with a smile that showed her perfectly placed pearly white teeth.
I had to cut it short to come up here. It's funny how it's not a deployable unit, but all the stipulations still apply.
Yeah, well, that's because the whole office needs to be mobile in case the Commandant wants to go do something somewhere with them.
It makes sense.
She took a sip from her glass.
The food's supposed to be good around here, right?
I think so. It's different than around San Cupertino and Angeles, but it's good.
Samum bobbed her head, and then the two of them were silent. It wasn't any longer than a minute at the most, but to Thatch, the silence screamed through his ears like a jet leaving the tarmac. Samum licked her bottom lip and somberly started.
Hey, so I know that karma can be a bitch, and I know some things can come back and bite hard in the ass.
Thatch's heart started to melt. His mind couldn't put the feeling into words, but he anticipated that she was going to say something that might lead to the two of them taking a shot at an honest relationship. Maybe not full-blown end-all be-all that night, but he at least hoped and wished that she would lead into them at the very least trying to put their toes in the water.
Sometimes I think maybe I should have treated Thatch better. And I want to tell you that I'm sorry and that nothing's your fault.
Thatch put his hands on the armrest to push himself up. He was intent on holding her in his arms, but by the time he was standing, Samum had leaned herself against the wall, showing him she didn't want him to touch her. Thatch kept leaned forward.
Look, I've been in love with you since the moment I saw you walk up with a book in your hand in the smoke pit. You're intelligent and witty, and you can be so kind and sweet when you want to be, and you're the most beautiful thing I've ever put my eyes on. Now, I'll admit, though, that sometimes I really fucking hate you, but I love you so much that it hurts.
Ugh, I hate that. Everyone always just loves me because of how I look. I can't stand that. There's more to me than my face.
Thatch rolled his eyes. He was about to retell her everything he said about her before he said she was beautiful. but she was gone and out the door.
Great.
Thatch clamped his teeth down and forced the tears that were trying to flood out of his eyes back down into the caverns from which they sprung. He grabbed the whiskey and, completely disregarding the glass, drank straight from the bottle. Thatch needed a cigarette. He hastily threw on his boots and jacket and went into the backyard. When he closed the door, he heard music coming from the house, smudged up next to his. Samum was on her back porch, listening to a song on her phone as she drank her wine.
She's literally next door. You're shitting me, right?
Thatch leaned back against his wall. He was tempted to leave and go smoke out front, but that would have admitted defeat. He listened to Samum's music. A song that he was very familiar with played through the speakers. A song of seduction, unspoken love, and the urge to forget the old way of life. Lyrics that inspired the listener to embrace the power of music and the darkness of the night. Thatch wondered if it was a ploy. Was she trying to play a game with him? The ants came back to his skin, and a swirling in his head forced him to turn it away. He was about to flick the rest of its cigarette to the ground unsmoked, when Samum waltzed over to him and propped herself up next to him on his deck.
I've always loved this song.
She smiled and took a sip from her glass.
Yeah.
Thatch drank straight from his bottle.
Maybe this is just a playlist and the song has nothing to do with me.
Samum flipped through the music app on her phone and played another song, La Petite Mort, as she gluttonously sucked down her wine. Thatch thought there was no way she would play 2 songs in a row about unrequited love with him right there if it wasn't about him. Over the course of the song, Thatch and Samum's fingers made their way to each other's, and through the blur of the whiskey, Thatch found Samum wrapped up in his arms.
Thatch, do you ever miss someone and not know how to handle it?
Yes.
Thatch placed his cheek on top of Samum's head.
Is there to be some salvation to this train wreck that we dared call a relationship? I know that feeling very well.
It's a terrible feeling.
It is.
Thatch tightened his arms around Samum's waist. She was fit and soft in all of the right places. Samum positioned her head up so that she was face to face with Thatch. The little ants on his skin were packing up into a rocket in Thatch's heart and were about to shoot themselves into space. The boosters were lit and the fire was going. Samum's lips opened, and Thatch stared deep into the windows of her soul.
So, who are you seeing nowadays?
The ants in Thatch's heart scrambled as the interior equipment of their rockets shot off electrical arcs.
Huh?
Samum pulled herself out from Thatch's arms and took a long swig from her wine bottle.
We've both moved on, and we're mature adults. We can talk about this.
Open her up! Screamed one of the ants piloting the rocket. We got a fire! Thatch didn't know where the conversation was going, or how to respond to her question.
Who's your current love interest?
Samum asked again. Thatch didn't know what to do or say. He blurted out the first name that came to his mind.
Angela.
He lied. There was no Angela. The only reason he even thought of the name was because of a beer he had had earlier in the night. He sputtered to say something else, but before he could get off another word, Samum said,
Mine's Juan.
She was already tipsy and babbly, going on without a single regard for Thatch or his thoughts.
He's a therapist, but he moonlights in a mariachi band. We go at it for a while.
Samum's demeanor grew haughty and pretentious as she walked herself in a circle around Thatch's deck.
Then he tells me that he's tired of me being a bitch to him, so I go and cut my hair off out of rage.
Samum pointed a finger at Thatch.
This is before I get orders here, by the way. And I go back to his restaurant to see if he notices me. He's playing with his little band around the tables, and when they come to me, he makes eye contact for less than a second, turns his nose up, and walks away like I wasn't even sitting there. Ugh.
It hit Thatch that absolutely nothing Samum had said that night pertained to him. She was hung up on someone else, and he just happened to be there. The rocket in his heart ignited and collapsed on the launch pad. Little Gus Ant Grissom, Antward White, and Roger B. Shanty burned alive in the command module. Third-degree burns charred their little ant bodies, and they died screaming in pain after the fire burned through their little ant suits. Thatch rolled his eyes, pretending to be annoyed instead of heartbroken again. He lit another cigarette and listened to Samum drone. By the time he cared enough to let himself pay attention, she was ranting about herself instead.
And that's about it. That's me. No one loves you, or if they do, they don't like you. Or they like you, but they don't love you. You laugh with whoever will pay you attention, and you fuck for fun.
She downed the rest of her wine and sneered at herself, rattling off as she bobbed and shook her head.
Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. Ugh.
The fuse in Thatch's give-a-fuck meter blew. His aunts were dead, and he didn't feel the need to subjugate himself to any more of Samum's shit that night.
Good night, Samum.
He leaned off the wall towards the door. Samum dropped her bottle, shattering onto the deck.
Oh, man! I didn't think I was going to do that.
Thatch watched her as she bent down and started picking up the shards off his deck.
I'm sorry about this. I didn't think that would happen.
She hissed as the glass cut her hands, spilling her blood on the deck. Thatch let out a chuckle of schadenfreude.
Why are you laughing?
Samum demanded with tears in her eyes.
Aren't you going to help me with this?
Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum.
All right, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening to Chapter 1. We will be moving forward, one chapter a week at a time. And I'd like to thank my Patreon people who get these chapters as soon as I'm done editing them. They got all these months ago. Actually, no, it would have been last year. Yeah, they would have had this. I don't know if they would have had the whole thing last year. They would have had most of this last year, I think. I don't remember. This book's been on Audible for a while. You can just go buy the book and listen to it there if you don't want to wait for me to, read it to you. But, if you like just coming and hanging out on YouTube, which I appreciate, you can wait for, the week by week. Although you do only get the bloopers here. But anyway, I would like to thank my Patreon people. I would also like to thank my YouTube channel members. And I would like to thank everyone who's gotten the War Chest, which is the box set of these books. All right. I hope that you are having a good day, good weekend, good night, whenever you're watching this. And I'll catch you next week. All right? All right. You have a good one. Ciao.
New book! Woo!
Smokepit Fairytales Book 5. Cassandra Stockton checking in. Whoop! Chapter 1.
All right, so I fucked up the whole first recording, so let's go with number 2 here.
Smokepit Fairytales, Volume 5.
So this is Chapter 1 of Smokepit Fairytales 5. Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. Hollis reading for Samum. And also, I just went, what the fuck, Thatch? What the fuck? How can you still be in love with her? Okay, now I'm done. Okay, I'm okay now. I'm all right. That's out of my system. This is a year later.
All right, Smokepit Fairytales Part 5, Chapter 1. Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. Yes, she is. She's the bitchiest bitch that ever bitched. And I hate her, which actually means she was very well written. So good job. Trip, I am not Corporal. He's a civilian now. I'm McKenzie. I own a bar. Gotta remember how to be him and not my normal trailer park self. I don't know if I remember how to do this. Fuck it, we'll do it live.
So in lieu of a sound check, we're going to just do a little experiment here, or demonstration rather. This was the microphone position for Book 4. This is the microphone position for Book 5. Sometimes it's not about the size or the motion of the ocean. It's just about learning new positions.
General Piroska. Chapter 1. Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. Fuck that bitch. This is the Marine Corps.
Khan's office stood next to his. They looked over different areas at the secretary section. It's my favorite section of the office.
Are you doing beer or liquor today? That's too southern. That's way too southern. I gotta get out of that trailer park shit. I gotta be McKenzie. McKenzie's too bro for that.
He managed to get Chuck, now a staff sergeant, in his ass. Scrolling down. First scroll of the book. First burp of the book.
Karma's a bitch, and so is Samum. All right.
Samum's a bitch. That encounter was far too amicable. Can't wait to see how she fucking pisses me off again.
Samum comes over. Damn it, Samum.
But his mouth smiled and invited her in. Do you want vampires? That's how you get vampires. And she sucks more than vampires. Word to the wise. Yeah, he's the one with fucking fangs, and she sucks more than he does, alright. No, she doesn't suck more than he does. He should have built a good fence and a good neighbor, like when he first fucking saw her, and just been like, yeah, pretend I don't live here. Like, Jesus Christ. Yeah, I like your pictures. I like them enough to tack them to the wall without framing them, and then to tear them up. Bitch.
Samum's a bitch. Okay.
Condescendingly? Oh, that's good. That's good!
Okay, Samum comes up to the porch because she's crazy.
Samum. Ugh, I hate that. Everyone always just loves me because of how I look. I can't stand that. There's more to me than my face. I can hear the way that she's going to read that. There's more to me than my face.
There's more to me than my face.
In a way that just makes me hate Samum so much. No, Hollis fucking kills this.
Ugh, I hate that.
There's more to me than my face. And I read it and my ears burn. And I'm like, God damn it! And then I hear her like speaking the bloopers. I'm like, oh, okay. You just did a really good job at Samum. Fuck. You sound like a normal person.
Samum's a bitch. Okay.
After she records it, tell me if I got the inflection right. Put them side by side in the bloopers. There's more to me than just my face.
Thatch actually talked about her intelligence and wit more than he talked about her looks. But anyway, you know that. I just need to say it. Okay.
Samum. So, who are you seeing nowadays? Fuck, I hate Samum!
Samum's a bitch.
The voice actress hates her. Yeah.
Because she's crazy.
So you dropped it on purpose to be fucking dramatic? You fucking child!